Welcome to the GAB Talks by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Olzak. To participate in the 2024 Book Award competitions, please visit independentpressaward.com and NewYorkCityBigBookAward.com. Thanks for joining us today as we chat with Beth Ann Hooper, author of The Roots That Clutch. She was the winner of the 2024 Independent Press Award for book cover design and a distinguished favorite in world literature. Beth is an American-born bilingual author, ghostwriter, poet, producer, and documentarian with 25 years of experience in international business communications. She is the founder of Tower of Babel Communications and Publications. In addition to the Independent Press Awards and many accolades for the print version, The Roots That Clutch was awarded Best International Short in the Swedish International Film Festival. Beth is also the producer of the award-winning documentary In the Interest of the Child. The Roots That Clutch is Beth's debut novel. She joins us today from New Hampshire, where she recently relocated after a lengthy residency in the Netherlands. Congratulations, Beth, and welcome to the GAB Talks.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So good to have you. So, Beth, before we get started and delve into The Roots That Clutch, I just want to clarify for our listeners and our viewers that The Roots That Clutch spans 21 years. It takes place in universities and manuscript libraries throughout Europe and the United States. It's very interesting because it's based on a true story, though you tell the story through the experiences of your literary persona, Jane. So, Beth, explain to us why you chose this particular literary style and how it relates to the premise and the theme of The Roots That Clutch.
Okay, well, I'll hold up the book just so that everyone can see it.
Fantastic.
The reason I chose a persona was for two reasons. One, for legal reasons. I'm obviously dealing with quite some important figures in literary history. And all my attorney friends said, write it as fiction because then no one can sue you. That's one reason.
Okay.
And because I was in corporate communications for years and dealt with attorneys on a daily basis, I knew I had to look into this before ever publishing. So I did. Also, but for artistic reasons as well, it's very hard when you have this true story, but you have to fictionalize it. For personal reasons as well, I sort of had to take on the guise of a ghostwriter, as I do for many of the executives I've written for. Because it was very, I guess as a Westerner, and this is why my partner who was Turkish was so important to my artistic development as well, with his Eastern view of things. It's very hard to accept that your life was determined before you were born. Now, when you come from the East, that's just a given. Mm-hmm. People accept it. They celebrate it. You celebrate your destiny, your predestination. And whereas in the West, we sort of see it as a death sentence when we realize we have no control over our lives. So using a persona was a way to kind of mitigate that demon that I still had to deal with as a Westerner. Now, the other thing that really irked me from the time I was in secondary school, because I went overseas when I was 16 as an AFS student. I only did high school in the U.S. up until sophomore year, and then my junior year I went over as an AFS student. And I loved being overseas so much, I convinced my parents to let me stay and do an international baccalaureate for another 2 years, so I could study either in Europe or in the U.S. Because an international baccalaureate is accepted everywhere in the world to enter a university. And we studied Joyce. And what irked me immensely, I remember that distinctively as a student, is that there was no portrait of the artist as a young woman. So once I had gone through everything I had gone through, and made this discovery during my PhD, I realized here it is. These are the obstacles you have to go through as a young woman to become an artist, to become a poet, to become a writer. And they are obviously very different than what Joyce had to go through. Now, I know it's very lofty and probably presumptuous to compare myself to Joyce, but why not?
Well, you are a poet.
Yeah.
You have your poetry is in your book. So, Beth, share with our readers and our listeners rather, and our viewers, what is the theme of The Roots That Clutch, and give us a snapshot of the story.
The basic theme is this. As I said, it's a portrait of the artist as a young woman. And just like Joyce, I used a persona. But during my PhD on T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound, and basically the objective of my PhD was because I had a hunch that he was not as original as everyone had assumed. I basically had the same distrust of him that William Carlos Williams had. Now, I had not looked into William Carlos Williams at all, because what you often do as a PhD student is you become myopically focused on the poets you are looking at. And that was T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. What I found out during the course of my PhD is that my grandmother had an affair with William Carlos Williams.
Now, for our listeners that don't know, William Carlos Williams was a modernist poet, and he was actually Pound was, I would say, a mentor of sorts of his.
Yes, Pound mentored both Eliot and Williams. Williams and Pound were at Penn together. Yeah.
And unlike Eliot and Pound, Williams was not an expat. He stayed in the United States, where
yes,
Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot both became expats. T.S. Eliot practically became British.
He became a naturalized British citizen. That's correct.
So in this story, Beth, Jane, your literary persona and your story, it's spanning 21 years as she's researching her PhD. And you, Jane, you discover letters during this research from Eliot to Pound. Now, how did these letters alter, because I want to sort of do this in order, how did these letters alter your perception of each poet?
Well, when I went to go see the letters, it's because at Yale, the only grant I could get, I got, which I was quite surprised about because I was turned down for everything else. And I was able to go to Yale. Now, what I found was not what I was looking for. That being said, it was still sort of Alibaba's cave. Because what I wanted to show was that there were a group of British poets who were doing the same thing that Eliot and Pound were doing 50 years earlier. And I actually showed that pretty quickly from the works themselves in my PhD. However, the proof in the pudding is correspondence, or that they admitted that they read them, or that they were influenced by them, or basically that's what they would often do in letter writing or in manuscripts. Or now, Eliot's widow did reply within 2 weeks to my initial request to see Eliot's manuscripts, which was a shock. She passed away.
She never shared those.
No, but she usually didn't even respond.
Wow.
She was known as never responding, and within 2 weeks I had a letter from her from London.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But it's also, she knew I was onto something.
Mm-hmm.
And because she refused to publish the letters after 1922 for years, much to the dismay of many scholars. And it also raised a few questions. Again, but because Faber and Faber is so powerful, this is a publisher unlike publishers in the rest of the world. they have, and especially Eliot, his estate, they have just a legal arsenal that is just unheard of because they earn so much money off of Cats, the royalties of Cats, the worldwide musical hit.
Oh, right. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone who was ever critical of Eliot, especially while Valerie Eliot was still alive, they just immediately had their lawyers go after them. And universities were afraid of the lawsuit, so they would not back up any academics. So basically what you had going on was this sort of charade at almost every conference I would go to. You'd see this kind of public praise of Mrs. Eliot, etc. But as soon as it was drinks time, there were other comments going around. And comments is basically a very big euphemism. So I think you understand what I mean.
Yes. Absolutely.
And they were extremely critical, extremely derisive. And because she was essentially blocking any kind of valid research or any kind of criticism on him.
Well, obviously for good reason in your discovery of the letters.
Yes. Now that was, now I was not allowed to see any of Eliot's stuff. She didn't, when I replied to her letter, I got silence again. So I figured, well, I'll just go see Pound's letters at Yale. And I won a grant to go see those. And I was there, and I was shocked to find Eliot's unpublished letters to Pound. Now, they since have been published. I have not looked at those. I will admit that, because I know the academic who was given permission to edit them.
To edit them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is basically what Valerie Eliot did until she was unable to. But the person it was passed on to, I know who he is. And he pressured me a number of times to pass on what I had, which I responded with silence.
So what did you discover, Beth, that was so alarming to you?
These were two poets who were friends and one had mentored the other. Mm-hmm. The tone of the letters after 1922 changed so drastically. They were literally, they became threats. They became legal threats. And Eliot had this specific, because this is what I discovered when I went to Pound's files at Yale, there were Eliot's unpublished letters to him.
Who was threatening who?
Eliot was threatening Pound.
With what?
Legal threats. He'd always use favor and favor or criterion letterhead when he did this. He'd type it out, and then he had his handwritten messages at the bottom. That was typical Eliot, all the way up until in the 1940s, when he was responding to one of Pound's wives' pleas to help him get out of St. Elizabeth's, because Pound was destined for the electric chair.
So let's back up a minute though. So you discovered that Pound's, and this was probably known, was the editor of the Wasteland. That
was not discovered until the 1950s.
Okay.
And it was kept secret until the late 1960s.
But not only was he the editor, but he changed the name to the Wasteland.
He changed the name. He determined what would be the first line
and the last,
and what would be the last line.
Right.
So this crosses, and since I'm, while I was doing my PhD, and this kind of made me different from the academics I was working with, was I was a practicing writer and poet already. Mm-hmm. And there's a line that you cross, and you have a very close relationship with your editor. Any writer knows this. You need your editor as much as he needs you. Mm-hmm. But there's a line you cross, then it becomes collaboration. And in my mind, as a practicing writer and poet, this had become collaboration. Yeah. And that was also the expectation in Pound's mind as well.
But C.S. Eliot completely, he would not admit to any of this.
No, I mean, he literally made off with the manuscripts. He refused to give Pound a copy of the manuscripts after numerous requests from Pound, after Pound had sent him his edits. And he sent the manuscripts to his attorney in New York, twin.
Mm-hmm.
And within 6 months, this attorney, and we're talking about 1922, so this is lightning speed in 1922. Within 6 months, the attorney had him registered as the sole author of the Wasteland at the Library of Congress.
Wow, that's amazing. So,
Yeah.
so Beth, if I may, you wrote, and this is a quote of yours: "If poetry does anything, it does not lie. Poetry and poets tell the unspeakable truths no one wants to know."
Yeah.
Do you believe that of all poets?
Yes, I do.
You're a poet as well, so
Yes.
you know this from firsthand experience.
Yeah, we are very, well, I speak for myself, but I do, but I'm a very bad liar. I just can't deal with the duplicity. It's like there's poetry in everything, and every word you must say.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know that the modernist poets, their whole objective was, one of their big objectives was impersonality, which kind of juxtaposed them always to the confessionalists, such as Robert Lowell and Sylvia Plath. However, I believe all their secrets are in their poetry.
Absolutely.
Yes. And they could use, because none of us can keep our secrets. Eventually they'd come out.
Well, isn't poetry a vehicle for that?
It is, and I do believe, the modernists, they had learned a very big lesson from their predecessors, the poets I looked at and compared to them. They learned you cannot have scandals, otherwise you will not get published, especially in London.
Right. Well, T.S. Eliot he made that his mission, to become so almost so British, that he was so close to the British publishers. He didn't want to be alienated by them, because
completely. He pandered to the British. Yeah.
Exactly.
What I think is that Eliot did not. He came from St. Louis originally. I mean, I know his family was from New England originally, but he himself came from St. Louis. I think he was afraid of being seen as a dumb Southerner in London.
Absolutely, for sure. So Beth, you were urged by a professor to explore the poetry of William Carlos Williams when you were working on your PhD.
That's correct, yeah.
And what did your mom tell you? You alluded to it in the beginning of our interview. What did your mom tell you that changed the trajectory of your research?
When I was doing my master's, well, I had a few clues. And from what I understand, people with similar histories had the same thing. You have sort of these inklings during your whole life that you think, hey, that's kind of strange. Why did nobody say anything? Mm-hmm. The first one was when I was sitting in class, literally, in Leiden, and I had just taken this class to kind of get out of the house while I was finishing up my master's. And it was on American poetry, modern American poetry. And I read in the anthology that William Carlos Williams had been a doctor in Rutherford, New Jersey. And I was so shocked, I literally had to leave the class.
He was, in fact, a pediatrician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I finished my master's, I called my mom, and she was going to come over for my graduation. And she just asked me, because I had never really talked about my master's with my mom. She had just asked me, what is it about? And I just said, oh, it's about poets. And she said, oh, your dad was delivered by a poet, William Carlos Williams or something. And I was just, wow. And I was like, oh, and because I knew what was coming as soon as she said, oh, your dad. Because when I spent some time in Paris, because after I did my international baccalaureate, I actually wanted to study in France. So during the summer, I would take French courses at the Sorbonne. And one of the woman I rented my room from, she had met Camus. And everybody told me, when you meet her, that's the first thing she's going to tell you, because that's what she tells everyone.
Okay, well, I think I would too.
Yeah, exactly. But why did nobody tell me this?
Yeah.
This is wrong.
Yeah.
And this is the whole thing about family secrets. And this is one reason I decided when I come back, I'm coming to New England, because I have this whole family history on my father's side that I know nothing about.
You want to uncover a few more secrets. Yeah.
The good things are kept quiet as well.
I know.
My father's family established Nantucket. I knew nothing about this.
Okay, so
I've heard this from strangers.
Let's get the plot thickens. So you learn this, and then you visited with your dad and your uncle. You actually asked your dad to look at your PhD, to read it for you.
Right.
And he gave you a family heirloom. It was a copy of William's autobiography, which was inscribed to your grandmother.
Yes.
Doris Hooper. And it read Doris Hooper for old time's sake, dated April 1st, 1952. Second bombshell. So then, okay, how did that all connect?
How that started was there had been such a row at the University of Leiden about my PhD that literally my PhD supervisor quit, and we transferred my PhD to Louvain in Belgium. And when we had our first meeting, I was really looking forward to this because by this time I was in the midst of a very acrimonious divorce with my ex-husband. And I wanted to start off the meeting on a light note. And I knew that my PhD supervisor, he loved trivia. So I just started off and I said, "Oh, did I ever tell you who delivered my dad? It was William Carlos Williams." And I was so looking forward to this meeting because I really wanted a break from, all the nightmare of my divorce, etc. And he just stood up. He went completely pale, and he was usually this very jovial person. He told me to sit down, and he said 3 times, "You need to look into your DNA. And you have to do this before you defend." And because I had never looked into William Carlos Williams beyond him being a doctor in Rutherford, there goes my wonderful meeting.
Yeah.
And then he went on to tell me that he had been a womanizer. He had had numerous affairs. And I had worked with my PhD supervisor for years, and he's definitely one of my guardian angels, no doubt. And that he would go so far to still defend me in my work was really important because we faced so many obstacles at that time. And he was one of the few academics who would accept that I looked at poetry differently because I wrote myself. So it was actually my PhD supervisor who realized it. And then he pressed upon me, "You have to find out everything before you defend, because they're already saying you have an axe to grind. And if you turn out to be related to him, they're definitely going to say you have an axe to grind," because he was Eliot's biggest critic.
Right. He was not a big fan of TSM.
No, he actually even said in his autobiography that the Wasteland was the worst thing that ever happened to English letters. I am convinced he knew what had happened between him and Pound.
Between Pound and Eliot.
Yeah, because he remained loyal to Pound.
Right.
Even after Pound was incarcerated at St. Elizabeth's, he visited him as a doctor to check up on him.
Yeah.
There are pictures of them that were taken right before both of their deaths of old men.
But what did the inscription lead you to? You discovered something that gave you a little bit more proof and foundation to your beliefs.
Yeah, this was about 9 months after my PhD supervisor had said this, and I went to go visit my father, and who lived at Georgetown, Texas, and my uncle as well at that time. And this was during summer vacation, so my kids could see their grandparents, etc. And I also wanted to do some research at the Harry Ranson in Austin, because I knew there were some manuscripts and letters there as well. And during our visit, my dad found out that he had had cancer for maybe the 2nd or 3rd time. And it spooked him, and it spooked everyone, especially because I also knew I had to stay in the Netherlands until my children were adults, because my ex-husband would not let me return to the U.S. with them. So we literally didn't know how often we'd be able to see each other. And with my father's, renewed diagnosis, my uncle had already said, when you defend your PhD, I'm going to give you that to you. He decided to do it during that visit.
So why was the date significant in the inscription? It was April 1st, 1952.
That is probably around the time that he was conceived, because in early 1934, Williams also wrote the poem Nantucket.
Okay, and how does that relate to your grandmother, Doris?
My grandmother was from Nantucket. As I stated before, her family basically founded Nantucket.
Oh, I have goosebumps.
Yeah.
So Beth, what lessons can we learn about the past?
I guess nothing is ever as it seems.
Absolutely. That is so true. So, the novel spanned 21 years.
Mm-hmm.
How did you evolve from the onset of your discovery to the end? Describe the transformation.
Well, it explained a lot of things to me. My father, before he became a lobbyist, actually wrote for the Miami Herald. And it's literally on my birth certificate that his profession was writer.
Hmm.
My daughter in the Netherlands, my oldest daughter, just won a short story prize.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's funny because whether I talk about my father or I talk about my daughter, people all say it's in the blood.
It is, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Now you know for sure.
Right. And what's also interesting is when I started writing poetry at a very young age. And that's around the same time that the relationship between me and my father really started breaking apart. He started to push me to journalism, write for the school newspaper or whatever. And I never realized how threatening that poetry was to him until now.
Now, did your dad know about Williams? Did he know that he delivered him? Did he know about the relationship with your grandma?
He knew that he delivered him, and my father and I, we went, after I was given the book, I really couldn't talk about it for a year. And so after a year, I contacted my PhD supervisor and I told him what had happened. Mm-hmm. And he said, you have to find out more. So basically I had to pressurize my father to tell me basically the secret. Because also it was my uncle who gave me the book. It was not my father.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether they spoke about this beforehand. Mm-hmm. But this is the tragedy sort of and people say now, well, I mean, isn't that wonderful? And isn't that amazing? Shouldn't he be proud of it? People don't understand. If you were not fathered by the father you thought your father was, this ruined lives. This ruined careers.
You don't know who you are.
No.
Yeah.
Well, that too. But, we're talking about, the 30s, 40s, 50s, even 60s, 70s, 80s. You can't let things like this get out.
No, absolutely.
And, now in our age where we talk about everything and, nothing is sacred anymore. There's no discretion. It's people don't understand that. Now I'm one generation removed, so it's easier for me, obviously. I still had a lot to work out. Because I had to literally rewrite my own history for myself and my own identity. And I had to do that in a foreign country where I had no points of reference. Mm-hmm. So literally here I am walking around with this big story and I'm in a country where it has no reference for anyone else. It has no relevance because these weren't Dutch poets. These were American poets.
Exactly. Well, how has academia here in the United States received this?
I don't know, because since I've decided not to pursue my PhD because I realized this story was much bigger than academia, I've stayed away from academic circles.
Okay.
So, and I've actually been advised to continue doing so.
What is the significance, Beth, of the title, The Roots That Clutch?
The Roots That Clutch is literally a line from the Wasteland.
And what does it signify?
It signifies that basically it is in the blood. Whatever we do, no matter everything we try to conceal, it eventually will come out, and it usually comes out in the children. I don't know if you know, my daughter's in the story. It as I was writing it, I realized they're like the chorus in Greek tragedies. They see everything. They observe everything. They say nothing, but once in a while some commentary might come out. Now, I use that usually in poetry, in poems within the book as sort of the chorus. But and this was the sense I had as a child growing up too. I knew something was wrong. Something didn't fit. And until my father and I took that trip to Rutherford, and at the William Carlos Williams Center, and this is really hard for me.
It's okay. It's
Yeah, when he saw the pictures of Williams and then disappeared into the men's room for 45 minutes and cried.
Of course, it's a life miss. That's the feeling, a life miss.
Right.
Yeah.
But you also realize that he had his whole life. You have entire lives are built around these family secrets.
Yeah.
And then just in an instant, it all collapses, and your entire life is built around this too. And my father had many demons, and it explained everything to me. So this is why
There's a lot of questions.
Right.
Yeah.
And I do, though my father and I had a very fraught relationship, two writers in one family is seldom paradise. That's just the reality of it. But I still have compassion for what he went through. And as one human being to another. And to have to have your whole life as theater, to not be the real person you are. I wish I had filmed it. I have pictures of it. In 2008, my father and my children and we went on a trip to Yellowstone. And when we were flying back, we had to change it in Denver. He would fly on to Texas, and we were going to fly back to the East Coast to see my mother and spend some time with her. And he read a story to my children at the airport, and
It's okay.
it was about a toy rabbit who wanted to become a real rabbit. And it ended something like, all I ever wanted to be was real.
Well, he had to have some piece that he was really able to discover that he was real at the end, knowing his lineage, knowing for sure. Complicated.
No, but till the end, he still ran from it. It was really tragic.
Actually, that is true.
Yeah, it was really tragic. He had to. My father really. My father, of course, came from the silent generation that did.
I was going to say that generation. Yeah. They don't like to talk about any conflict, anything happening, especially within the family.
No, and in fact, I even met a bookseller together with my mother in Chadds Ford in Pennsylvania. And I didn't have the book with me. if you would like me to show you the book, I can, with
Yeah.
the inscription from Williams.
See that.
But he had been a neighbor. He had been William Carlos Williams' neighbor
Wow.
up until the late 60s. And I mentioned I had this book, and I said, I believe he had an affair with my grandmother, and he immediately shut up.
Do you have the book there, Beth? Can you?
Yes,
hold
I
it
do.
up
I'll go
for
get
us?
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love you to hold it up for our viewers. Okay, waiting for Beth to get the book that was a family heirloom, Williams' autobiography, inscribed to her grandmother, Doris Hooper. Doris Hooper, for old time's sake, dated April 1st, 1952. Let's see it, Beth.
Okay, here you go. Still in the saran wrap that my uncle had it in.
Autobiography, wow.
Yeah, it was the first edition, so
Okay.
I assume he saved it for her. And there it is.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
And
go on.
I think what's interesting is, because when you sign books, you usually don't date them. But of course, doctors date everything.
Mm.
So I'm wondering if, was that the date that he was possibly conceived? Because it would correspond with his birth date, which was January 3rd.
Wow.
Being, approximately 9 months later. Mine is January 2nd, by the way. So
wow, the coincidences, they just keep on popping up. So
yeah,
Beth, Roots That Clutch obviously was your debut novel.
right.
Back in the States, I know you're working on something. You have to be, because you said there's so much connection, so much past history that about your family. Are you working on a new project?
I have a number of things up my sleeve, yeah.
Okay.
But I also have 40 years of poetry that I'd really like to do something with.
Oh, wow. That I would say that's probably number one on your list.
Right.
So you were awarded the Distinguished Favorite in World Literature. Congratulations. But
thank you very much.
Clutch was also awarded winner for book cover design. Your graphic designer, and I'm going to butcher this name. Can you say it for me?
Geld Ruiter.
Thank you. Of Amsterdam. It's responsible for the award-winning cover. How did you choose the cover? Tell me about the collaboration and what does it symbolize?
Yes, Kelt and I had worked together at another company, and he was their graphic designer, and we actually did a few corporate magazines together.
Okay.
And this was back in 2013, and he and I worked so well together. That was really my last salaried position before I decided I'm going to go off on my own. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to publish my book. And he and I worked so well together, and I had worked enough with creative people at corporations that I realized when you work with other creatives, you need to work with someone you would trust your life with.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so basically we've worked together since then, both as freelancers. We would throw work to each other, etc. And I still am going to retain him even though I'm in the US. That was one of the big obstacles or sort of dilemmas I faced when I moved is, whether it be in filmmaking or in publication or etc. I have this amazing creative team who, you would indeed trust your life with. And that just doesn't fall out of the sky. You have to develop that and work on those relationships, and they take years.
Absolutely do.
So
tell us about the actual cover. What is that? What is the cover all about? And how did
the cover is actually from a Gaziantep in Turkey.
Okay. And
it's one of the Greek mosaics from Zogma, the old Greek town there. And Keld had come to me with a number of options, and some of them were sort of over obvious. That you had a very old tree with roots clutching into the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, similar
very
to the shots
yes.
in the video that accompanies it or the film. And it was funny because, young people, they love that. But older people said, no, you've got to go with that one. Because I sort of did a kind of local focus group in my little town where I lived. And everyone said, no, you've got to go with that one. And that was sort of my first instinct but I wanted to kind of get a confirmation. And we still receive so many compliments on it. And it is just really his creative genius. But, when I work with other creatives, I work with them like I like to be, worked with. You need to give me that space. Give me that creative space, and I can work magic for you. And that's how I try to work, how I like to work with other creatives as well. Give them that space. And they will work magic for you. And then, your magic will work with theirs.
It was a great,
and it becomes something even better.
Yeah, it was a fantastic collaboration. It's a terrific cover.
Yeah.
Beth, this was really, really fascinating. Can you hold up a copy of the book for us?
Sure.
Really beautiful. Look at that. So lastly, Beth, how can our listeners find out more about your work and also purchase a copy of The Roots That Clutch?
Yes, if you'd like a signed copy, you can go to therootsthatclutch.com. And when you click on order, then you can send me an email and I'll send it to you. It's also available on Amazon as an ebook.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Beth, this was so fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. We are so looking forward to seeing your poetry, more of it.
Thank you.
You publish a book so that we can really delve into your work of the past somewhat 40 years. Thanks again, Beth, for joining us today.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. This is your hostess, Gabby Olzak of the GAB Talks. Next podcast, we'll meet with Michael C. Higgins, author of Exploring Wine Regions. Until then, keep on reading.